From the Park School of Communications here at Ithaca College, we welcome in one of the biggest faces in the sports broadcasting world and the host of Get Up on ESPN, Mike Greenberg. Welcome into the Manna Show. Mike, glad to have you on.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
So, Mike, first I want to, start off things with the Jets before we get into anything with your career and advice. Talk about that London game, them beating the Titans. I know that you were excited from, what I saw on ESPN and Twitter. What happened in London against the Falcons?
Nothing good. They might just as well have not bothered making the trip. That's the second road game that they have played this year, that if they had just not bothered getting on the plane, the result would not have been markedly different. The Denver game and that game, honestly, if they could have just saved themselves the jet fuel and whatever other expenses are involved in playing road games, because had they not bothered making the trip, it would not have been less competitive than it was.
Yeah, I can feel that pain as a New York Giants fan. New York sports right now, especially in the football aspect, nothing good going on. So now I want to move over to your days at Northwestern, the Medill School of Journalism, one of the best journalism schools in the country. My passion as an aspiring sports broadcaster started at around the age of 6. When did that passion start for you? Was it something that began at Northwestern before, or more serious as the years went on?
It was more akin to your experience. I don't know this, but my mother will tell you that she used to sit me in front of the television and I would announce the football games while they were being played when I was 5 years old. Now, a job like mine existed then. Maybe I would be a sweat. And I admired so many of the newspaper writers. And there are certainly some days that it feels like a job, but there are almost no days that I don't feel very fortunate that this is the way I make a living.
Yeah, it's a great business. And obviously with other broadcasters that I've talked to, you really don't work a day in your life and you're doing something that you love. And then, moving when you got out of college, you got right into the business, being in Chicago. Talk about the early parts of your career. What did you want to get into right out of the gates, being in Chicago, being able to cover the World Series and, your first few years going from TV to radio? What was that experience like, your first few years out of the gates in the business?
So I worked in Chicago. I started in radio, and through a series of extremely fortunate circumstances, which are too intricate and not nearly interesting enough to get into all the details of here, I was the primary reporter on WFAN in New York. So this was shortly after WFAN in New York became a success. They started local sports radio stations started popping up in other markets. And I was in the Chicago area. And so I got a job working for them, covering the local team, covering the Bulls. And this was when they were winning championships with Michael Jordan. So I was 24 years old and I was on the road with Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen and Horace Grant and Phil Jackson, first three-peat team. So not the one that was primarily seen in The Last Dance, not the ones that had Dennis Rodman. But the ones that had Horace Grant, honestly, I think were actually better teams. I think if you look at the 6 championships the Bulls won in the Michael Jordan era, I think the best team was the second one. And I was around them every single day, there with them every day. And then the next year when they won and they beat Phoenix, and then Michael retired and went down to play baseball, and I followed him there. I was in Sarasota, Florida, covering Michael Jordan playing for the White Sox. So my early experiences in the business, and again, it's impossible to believe how fortunate this is, but almost all of my earliest experiences in the business surrounded covering Michael Jordan. And, that he was a star of such magnitude that he launched a million careers, many of which everybody knows, Nike and what he did for the NBA and any number of other things. But there were also so many of us who were fortunate enough to be around him, just to have been at the right place at the right time, and it changed all of our lives too. That was the story of the early part of my career, and it's something that even as I say it out loud now, all these years later, I know how ridiculous it seems, but it is true. I was 24 years old, and my job was to be around Michael Jordan literally every day.
That's a kid's dream to be around Michael Jordan. And then, today some of those other people, might be able to talk about LeBron James, maybe not to the same magnitude as Michael Jordan with his ability and what he was able to do, not just in basketball, but the whole entire landscape of sports. And then, going from Chicago, you had a big jump going to ESPN and then kind of just grounding your career there. Talk about that jump and, adapting, going to ESPN, the biggest sports entity in the whole entire world.
Yeah, that was another one that worked out well. Like in life, Cam, timing is so important. And in 1996, ESPN decided that they were going to start a new network called ESPN News. And they hired a whole bunch, 11 to be specific, 11 young anchors from around the country, sports anchors from around the country. And by this time, I had added, in addition to covering Chicago sports for the radio station, I'd started working for the 24-hour local cable TV channel as well, which was a small operation, but I was able to get sort of small market TV experience without having to leave a big market. I was working in the suburbs of Chicago and living in the city of Chicago. And it was during that time that I met my wife or the woman who has subsequently became my wife, whom you know. So it worked out extraordinarily well. So I had this TV experience, and ESPN decided to start this network. I didn't have nearly enough experience to go work for SportsCenter, which at that time was the overwhelming pinnacle of the industry. But because they were starting this new network, they were looking for young people like me and were willing to accept the level of TV experience that I had. I had a lot of sports coverage experience, but I didn't have a lot of TV experience. But as it turned out, they hired me. And with only a year and change of TV experience under my belt, I won 1996, which means that just in the last month or so, I celebrated 25 years at ESPN.
Mike, congratulations on that. Yeah, your time at ESPN has been special. I remember, the days with Mike and Mike watching the show in my kitchen, all the memories. I can remember you dressing up as Tom Brady. One of the shows, I remember you, needing to milk a cow. The memories go on and on. How are you guys able to just have that show stand out from all the other shows, from what you guys were able to do as a radio show, but also being on TV, and then just having that chemistry for such a long time?
How it stood out, part of it is that we were early. There were local sports talk radio stations all over the country. There were not a lot of people doing it with a lot of success nationally. Most notably Jim Rome. Jim Rome was probably the only one who was in before Mike and me, who really made it in such a way that he was well known in a lot of different places. So when ESPN decided to do a 24-hour sports radio network and put Mike and me in the mornings, it was with very low expectations, which in reality turned out to be a very good thing. Because when you launch something with very high expectations, you almost invariably are going to come up short of those, and people are going to wonder what's wrong. When you launch something with very low expectations, you are much more likely to exceed them, and people will perceive you to be very successful right off the bat, when in fact you are just sort of getting out of the gate. Well, that was what happened with us. So we had a very positive feeling about us from the very beginning, and we were able to develop over time. The chemistry piece of it is something that is really not definable. It's not predictable. I don't think it's something you can teach or learn. I think it's something that just has to be fortunate and be there. And if we were to do a show together and we had really good chemistry, then the show would be Mike times Cam. It would be multiplying. It would be a force multiplier, which is a commonly used phrase now. It wasn't then. We each make each other better than we are independently capable of being. And that's what chemistry is. And Mike and I clearly had it. And I can't tell you why. We couldn't be two more different people from two more different backgrounds, with more different ideas about life in so many ways. But for some reason, we fit together like a glove on that radio show, and that was the secret sauce. Of course, that was the most important factor in the success that we had.
Now at Get Up, you're hosting a TV show, and to be a host, there's so much that goes into it. I have not been hosting shows, as much right now, just starting at the Park School of Communications. But I know that, you obviously have to conduct that show. You have to conduct the analysts, having the producers in your ear, when to get off air, when to, move on from topic to topic. So what advice would you have to younger hosts on controlling a show and, keep everything conducted? Sometimes it does go off script, but, some advice on that, being on Get Up the last few years.
Yes. It's the best question that you've asked me. And this is the most important lesson that any of the students, yourself included, but not limited to you, can learn from this conversation. The difference between being an anchor and being a host is this. An anchor hosts a show from the chair. A host produces the show from the chair. And that is the difference. So I'm not sitting there just talking. I'm sitting there producing the show in my head. I know what we're trying to get from everyone. I know when I'm going to a break. I know how much time I have. I know what the objective is. I am producing the show from where I'm sitting. And that is what hosting is. Anchoring is something different, and it is a useful and meaningful and not to be ignored talent. And there are the people who do it really, really well. I admire them, and they are excellent. But hosting is a vastly different endeavor, and that's what you should have in your mind when you're hosting a show. You're not anchoring. You're not just sitting there. You're not reading words other people wrote for you. You're not. You're actually creating the show yourself. It is a creative endeavor, and that should be collaborative, of course, with your producers and your staff. I don't mean to say that you just do whatever you want up there, but you should be as aware of what you are trying to accomplish, of what the vision of the show is. You should be every bit as aware of that as you sit there conducting it as any of the other people involved, the coordinating producer, the line producer, the director, anybody. And that is, that's what hosting is. And that to me is a very important distinction.
Behind the scenes, before a segment starts or gets going, do you, for example, Ryan Clark and Dan Orlovsky, do you talk to them about, hey, like where this segment is going to go and, this is what I'm going to pitch to you? Or, are some things just, off the hand, when you guys go from segment to segment, more do they know what, you're going to get at?
You always have a plan. We have a meeting before the show. You don't do it in the commercial breaks. We have a meeting before the show. Well, first of all, we have a staff who will do interviews, pre-interviews with each of them the day before. So we know what's on their mind, what they're thinking, where they have interesting stuff, where are interesting places to take them. Those will be written up by those producers and they will be sent to me. So I can decide what I think are the most interesting places to go. Then we will have a meeting, 2 hours before we go on the air, during which I will go over with each of them. These are the places that we want to go. This is what I want to talk about. And this is what we're going to do. So everyone knows exactly what we want to do going in. Now, the best shows are usually the ones where something unexpected happens and we wind up following that. And that is also fine. So I think it is important that you have a plan. You put together a show. It is important that you have a plan, but that plan should be written in pencil, not in ink, because you have to be willing to be flexible. You have to be willing to adapt on the fly, because a live show is ours is 2 hours. It is exactly that. It is a fluid entity. It is almost like a living, breathing being unto itself. Any number of things are going to happen that you might not expect, no matter how well you have planned for them. And a good host is going to know whatever just happened here is more interesting than what we anticipated and then what we were planning on doing. I'm going to follow in this new direction. And that's part of the art of the whole thing.
Coming to the end of the interview here with Mike Greenberg, going towards aspiring sports broadcasters, again, going into the business, coming out of college, what advice do you have to them when it comes to, finding representation, an agent, those kind of things, and just, getting their foot in the door, mostly for those, college kids and students that are, just entering the real world?
Well, representation is critical at some stage in your career. I think that the business has evolved and changed so much from when I started, which now is 30 years ago, that I don't think my advice on that is that valuable. My gut feeling is that those are questions that the people who are working with you guys every single day, that your guidance counselors or whoever it is that is able to advise you will have a much better sense of when in the process seeking representation makes sense. Meaning, is it right before you graduate? Is it after you get your first job? Is it? I honestly don't know in the landscape of the industry now how to advise young people about that. The one thing I have always said, though, is I never advise any young broadcaster to sign with any agent who requires that broadcaster to pay them in advance, which is to say, and I don't even know if anyone does this anymore, but when I was starting in the business, there were agents who might say to you, okay, Cam, I'm an agent and you're an aspiring broadcaster. Give me $10,000 and I will go out there and try and find a job for you. And if I don't find a job for you, I'll still have the $10,000. That's a very, very bad idea. That I was never comfortable with it then. And I heard horror stories from people of that going really sideways. So my overwhelming thought on that has always been, I wouldn't advise doing that. But I also would really lean, if I were in your shoes, I would really advise you to lean on the people at Ithaca who are able to advise you in that area. Because again, the part of the business that you will be in a few years when you graduate is a place I haven't been in decades. And it's all changed so much that I don't want to give you bad advice because whatever I think might be very dated.
Mike, thank you so much. For Mike Greenberg, I'm Cam Manna. Thank you for listening, everybody.